so that we can keep that for others who aren't able to join us. Okay, thank you. So,
Sandra, while we're paused, I'm sorry to jump in one more
no,
housekeeping piece. We know we're over the lunch hour, and so if people want to
yes,
eat or move or do whatever you need to do, please feel free to do that during our time together.
absolutely. And cameras on or off as you're comfortable. We'll have some breakout sessions later where it's nice to have your cameras on and you can interact with each other. But so I've done a bit of a welcome. What we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Sam in a moment, who's going to talk a little bit about what is co-design, set the context for us, talk a little bit about what we've been up to as a team. And then Alexis is here, who's been leading a really interesting evaluation process for us and a developmental evaluation. And we've been trying to build a theory of change. So how do we do this work? And then we have a good chunk of time. We're going to have you talk to each other about different aspects of co-design. You know, where are we at? Where do we want to go from here? Do a bit of visioning with you together. Come back with a large discussion and then end with a bit of a call to action. So that's the plan for today. All right, Sam, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sandra. So the McMaster Co-Design Hub with Vulnerable Populations is a 3-year multidisciplinary initiative. It's funded by the McMaster Strategic Alignment Funding. We bring together an interdisciplinary group of researchers, students, service providers. So you might think of service providers being community workers or people who provide services within communities. Service users, you might think of people with lived experiences. And we do this to create a virtual and physical co-design VP. So the VP stands for Vulnerable Populations Hub. And we're aimed at creating health and social service system change with structurally vulnerable populations. The Co-Design Hub team is a large group across multiple disciplines, including health and rehabilitation, engineering, business, critical disability studies, design. We also have members from community. So everybody is sort of within and beyond the McMaster University landscape. Before we start, I want to talk about co-design and what co-design means to us and sort of situate what co-design is and how we're using it within our co-design hub, but also within the talk today. So we talk about co-design being involvement of public service users in the design, management, delivery, and or evaluation of public services. You might think about how does that differ from collaboration or engagement or something that you do in your own work, but not call it co-design. When we talk about co-design at the Co-Design Hub, we think about a systems level orientation where the goal is systems transformation to create health and social service system change for vulnerable populations. We're not just thinking about research, but we also think about education, interventions, and programs at a higher level, not just for specific teams or groups of researchers, but across systems and structures that impact those. So the term co-design might not be familiar to everyone on the call today. What we call co-design, you might call co-production or co-creation. You might borrow different qualitative terms such as participatory action research or PAR, community-based co-design, action research, participatory evaluation. There's also experience-based co-design or EBCD and participatory design. These might be more familiar in humanities and social sciences. In health and rehab, we often talk about co-design around collaboration and engagement. We might use the term involvement or public involvement, community engagement, or patient, family, youth engagement. So we just went over a whole bunch of terms, and there's lots of different names for co-design in the literature, and there's an increasing use and call for use of co-design and a variety of different methodologies that are associated with it. Our team recently published a paper in BMJ Open talking about, are you really doing co-design? Where we think about co-design as the application of user-centric research and service systems development approaches to solve a particular problem or to create change. So we think of co-design being as both a philosophy and a research method in order to create that systems level change and improve experiences for people, where we think of co-design as a dynamic and creative approach that embraces partnership and community. Co-design has roots in design thinking, so creating prototype solutions to address priority problems or issues from implementation all the way across evaluation. Thinking about co-design and all of the various terms, we think about key principles of co-design in order to create meaningfully and engage stakeholders. These key principles are around distribution of power, the amelioration of human experience, and positive societal impact. We know that power differentials can create spaces that are tokenistic and undervalue different kinds of knowledge. So we encourage a flexible, creative approach to partnership and ongoing communication and mentorship. So all of that to say, what does the Co-Design Hub do with all of this information? Well, the Co-Design Hub facilitates partnership formation. We advance methods of co-design with vulnerable populations and enable knowledge sharing. And we do this within 3 overlapping foci of engagement, innovation, and education. In terms of education, we provide monthly speaker series training and workshops, and today's event is one of our speaker series. We've had multiple speaker series events to date across a variety of different topics from people across different disciplines and organizations and communities. We've had participants attend from all across Canada, outside of Canada, and international. And we've had a lot of success creating this international community through online. Our speaker series are free and they're open to members at McMaster and within the community. We also host workshops. So we had a 2-day co-design training workshop in the spring, and we had a co-design workshop in January it was a partnership between OCAD and McMaster graduate students in thinking about leadership and equity focused co-design. In terms of creating education through publication, we publish our open access article in BMJ Open. We have 2 manuscripts in process. We publish videos on our website. We have 2 videos currently, one on what is co-design and another on power and vulnerability. We also have a lot of trainee engagement. We have MSc OT students. We have graduate level students at the master's, PhD, and postdoc level. We engage a lot of community. We have monthly team meetings where we have community representatives on our core team, including a family member, a service user, and a youth engager. We also have had held co-design cafes, which are sort of virtual discussions to co-design our co-design hub. And these occurred in October and November 2020 to help inform the strategic directions of the hub. And Alexis is going to talk about these a little bit more in depth. We also have a social media platform where we have our website. We also engage actively on Twitter at Co-Design Hub. We have a Facebook page and Instagram. And recently we developed a MailChimp email list where you can get in touch with us and hear about ongoing activities both from the hub, and we also share co-design opportunities from our community as well. We also create connections and synergies and are exploring lots of potential partnerships, training, and collaboration. And we have regular connections with the Office of Community Engagement and other partnerships within the McMaster community. And I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to talk about our innovations.
Thank you, Sam. So we're looking at innovation in a couple of different ways. I think one of the most exciting ways right now is through our innovation grant opportunities. So we do have a call currently out for to fund 2 projects that are done that's done by students at McMaster University in collaboration with a faculty member, and those are health or social service projects that focus on co-design with a vulnerable population. So there will be a link in case that's something that you're interested in. We have funded 2 of those projects in the past, and one is about gender-based complex homelessness, and the other is about transit for immigrant seniors. So look forward to hearing more about the outcomes of those projects. In terms of collaboration, our team members are engaged in lots of different opportunities for research and the further development of co-design methodology and its application. So there are some examples listed there for you. And in terms of our own research opportunities, Alexis will be talking about our internal developmental evaluation and the development of a theory of change. The other piece of evaluation that we're doing is a multi-site realist evaluation, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Just a bit of further information. Oh, sorry, Sam, do you want to go back one? Forgot I wasn't controlling the slides. This is a little further information about the innovation grant. So they are $5,000 available, and that's the same eligibility criteria that I just mentioned. This also updates the timeline. Our current grant will be due April 1st for those that are interested, and our website is on the final slide of this slide deck, where you're going to find more links and detailed information in case you're interested in applying. Thanks, Sam. Okay, now on to the realist evaluation. So this is designed as a multiple case study where we're embedding realist evaluation, and that might be a new term. So what realist evaluation does is to look at complex projects to determine how they work, who they work for, in what context, and to what extent. So the reason we're doing a realist evaluation is to understand how service users and service providers can work together to co-design health and social services, particularly for those who may experience challenges related to their health, income, employment, or housing, and onwards. It's not a limited list. Do you want to go again, Sid? Okay. So some of the things that we're interested in are the context. So in what environments and with which stakeholders is co-design being used? The mechanisms, so in terms of how are people doing co-design, Sam mentioned earlier that there's various terms used around co-design, sometimes participatory research, sometimes a particular form of co-design, human-centered design, etc. is being enacted. So what does that really look like in practice? And then what are the outcomes to doing that work? And we are not judging the outcomes of other people's co-design projects. Really what we're interested in learning is from their own perspectives. Were they able to achieve their aims? Were there other barriers that came into place that made it difficult for them to achieve their stated aims? Are there any recommendations or things that they would have done differently or suggest others do differently with respect to advancing co-design research in health and social service? So some of our questions are listed there for you. And then in terms of data collection, what we're looking to do with each case study site is to look at their organizational documents. Those could include internal documents such as agendas, meeting minutes, ethics applications, or their funding proposals, to really understand as much as we can about in deep, rich detail what's going on with the co-design project at each individual site. We're looking to do observations of a co-design event. So that could be a build project, it could be an information sharing session, and then we'd also like to do interviews with multiple stakeholders at each site. And so that would include the service users, members of the research team. It could include policymakers if that's a part of their site. It could include some of the community groups that people are partnered with. And that's where we're going to get more of that detailed information about how did this work for you? How were you engaged? Where did you run up against tension? What were the outcomes of your project, etc. Next. Here I'm going to pass it to Alexis.
Thanks, Michelle and Sam and Sandra. Can everybody hear me okay if I'm This distance, great. So as you can see, there is a lot going on with the Hub and a lot that has been accomplished over the last couple of years when the Hub was first established in 2019. So in reflection of all of this work that's happening, the Hub team began a developmental evaluation of its activities and its direction starting in February of last year. So the evaluation of the Hub used a developmental evaluation approach, which is a non-traditional approach to evaluation that supports the process of innovation in an initiative and its activities. Developmental evaluation is particularly well suited to new projects like the Hub that are focused on complex system change and where there's some uncertainty about activities and outcomes at the beginning of the project. The Hub started off as sort of an opportunity to think through what could be done to promote and advance co-design. So a developmental evaluation approach reflects this iterative back and forth process of co-design and the evolutionary nature of the Hub. The evaluation was co-created in collaboration with project team members, participants, and other community members. It was really flexible and adaptable to help frame concepts and ideas as they were developing, to track project activities, and quickly address issues of concern to the project team. The objectives were to gather feedback from the team, partners, and participants to inform the development of the Hub. So this event today is really part of that process. Last year, over the course of several meetings, we found that there was an expressed need to define co-design both within and beyond the team, as well as to articulate the goal of the Hub. This definition and articulation were needed to appropriately engage interdisciplinary researchers, students, service providers, and service users, or people with lived experience in the Hub itself. And this led to a community engagement process via 2 online co-design conversation cafes that we conducted last fall to co-create the Hub's theory of change. These cafes included a small number of service providers, researchers, and people with lived experience of service use and with co-design processes in the past to reflect on what needed to happen and what the Hub could do to advance co-design going forward. So a theory of change, which I'll talk about next, is a comprehensive description and illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. It's a mapping out or filling in between what a program or change initiative does, so its strategies or activities, and how these lead to desired goals or outcomes being achieved. Theories of change and developmental evaluation are living documents that should be tested and refined over time. This means that the draft outcomes framework, the illustration I'm about to show you, will go through many revisions. Outcomes might be added, moved, or deleted until a map eventually emerges that resonates with the group and tells a story that we can agree on. So this debate around what should be included and not included is really the most valuable component of a theory of change, to jointly define expectations, assumptions, and features of the change process. So we welcome your critiques, suggestions, thoughts, and ideas to help develop our theory of change and inform future directions of the Hub. Sam, can you go to the next slide? So this outcomes framework here is our draft version. It's intended to be read from top to bottom, so looking at the goal and then working backwards. So an outcomes framework that you see here is an illustration of a theory of change that starts with a goal and works backward to articulate the preconditions and strategies required to achieve that goal. So in this outcomes framework we have here, it reflects how our draft theory of change suggests that the goal of the Hub is the realization of consistent, equitable partnership and meaningful engagement of marginalized service users in all aspects of identifying, conceptualizing, planning, implementing, and evaluating health and social services. This is really the reason why we're doing this work. The goal within a theory of change is a concrete statement of what the world will look like when our work is complete. So this might be 1, 2, or 10 years out or more, but it's what really matters, and it's what makes our strategies so important to implement. The preconditions noted in the framework below that reflect the change the Hub hopes to influence as a result of our strategies. The proposed preconditions here must occur for the goal to be achieved. And so this means that co-design principles are used to create, improve, and provide high quality, equitable services. At the same time, decision-making power is reallocated to promote equity in the design, implementation, and evaluation of health and social services. To achieve these conditions, service providers need policies and processes that embed co-design principles, and the value of co-design must be recognized by all stakeholders. Stakeholders include people from structurally vulnerable communities, as well as health and social service providers, researchers, and policymakers, and so on. To facilitate this change, there's a need for more research, knowledge, skills, and capacity that is continually informed through increased awareness, understanding, and recognition of co-design, and supported by institutions to inspire innovation. This knowledge must then be mobilized into action so that policies, processes, and people demonstrate and recognize the value of co-design. To increase research knowledge, skills, and capacity for co-design, we think there's a need for institutional support for the flexibility required for co-design work. This means that there's a need to raise awareness, understanding, and recognition of co-design principles and methods amongst these stakeholders. But at the same time, there's also a need to help people in the community to better engage marginalized populations in co-design work through increased opportunities for partnership and collaboration among service users, providers, policymakers, and researchers. And this engagement may be supported by an established and known community of people doing co-design work, with an emphasis on the inclusion of individuals and communities that are structurally vulnerable and not often heard. So towards the bottom of the framework here are the various strategies, some of which Sam and Michelle were talking about. So since the co-design was established in 2019, the project team has been leading several strategies which are collectively intended to achieve particular outcomes. The team's currently working on defining the Hub's strategic approach to implementation of actions to advance co-design and promote equitable partnership and meaningful engagement of marginalized service users in health and social services. The original project foci of engagement, education, and innovation are visible in the strategies here, which involve producing and sharing knowledge and resources on co-design principles and methods, as well as collating best evidence and resources to support co-design, including the funding opportunities Michelle was talking about, and engaging institutional allies or partners, as well as people who want to do co-design work. So this includes the various stakeholders I've talked about. These strategies are intended to provide opportunities to showcase innovative co-design work in order to promote the value and recognition of this methodology. So after reflecting on the necessary preconditions in our theory of change, we found there appears to be a need to engage institutional allies, like representatives from research ethics boards or funding agencies, and other key decision makers, like policymakers, to build their awareness, understanding, and recognition of co-design principles and methods. This level of engagement presents an opportunity, perhaps, to support institutional innovation. And this work could begin with engagement at McMaster, for example, to support the university's efforts to advance equity through the better support of inclusive action research and the development of co-design specifically. So taken together, the strategies aim to facilitate dialogue and partnership formation to create safer, braver spaces for co-design and establish a community of people doing co-design work. We also know that there's a number of assumptions and external factors impacting our capacity to achieve these outcomes and create change. And this is where we'd really like to hear from you in terms of where we go from here, as well as whether and how this draft theory of change resonates with your knowledge and experiences as well. So I'll pass it over to whoever's next to take us into our small group discussions.
I'm going to pause for a moment and just ask if there are questions or comments. Maybe I'll open it up. And if someone had just asked me that they have to go, so we're going to record, and we typically post them on our website as well. So Lynn, I feel like I want you to unmute and say what you need to say.
I just was grabbing lunch, so here I am in
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm in the
All good.
food court. Yes. So yes, just reiterating what I just did there. Terrific that you're actually creating a theory of change. You know, it's one thing to have network, a sharing space, and a whole other thing to set yourselves accountable for what you're actually trying to achieve here. So congratulations, and it's a bunch of work to do the thinking behind it. So way to go. One of the things, so I'm at Social Impact Advisors. We focus on exactly this kind of work with nonprofits generally across Canada, and find that there's different definitions of a theory of change and what all it should include. Your definition was great. We find that the key focus is in having a statement, so in your goal statement, that it's measurable, that you can know, so it doesn't look like a vision statement of what you want, but it's actually something you're going to tangibly be able to achieve. And how will you know if you've done it? So we find that the key to success in that is that there's a date by which you're going to have done it, and it's a measurable thing. So, and perhaps you've been talking about all this, how do you define each of the components that you've got in there? How would you know, if there's no numbers, there's kind of an assumption that every health and social services program initiative, is meeting this standard. Is that realistic? Is there a geographic scope on it? Is it that by 2030 or some timeline, 50% or 20% might be a huge achievement? I don't know, is actually taking this kind of approach. And then of course you're accountable for measuring and actually seeing your results. So anyway, don't mean to get on the soapbox about it, but great to have this thinking and just push you to get the power of having this statement that becomes a measurable objective.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? This is where it's always good to get a community together.
Hi, it's Vivian here from United Way Health in Hamilton.
Hey, Vivian.
So just building off of Lynn's point as well, I'd be curious to know if it's X percentage, what the current baseline is in our work with social innovation and talking about social innovation and design thinking and user integrated research with nonprofits. The initial response from some nonprofits is, okay, so you're calling it design thinking now, or you're calling it co-design now, but we've been doing this for some time. We're frontline workers. We constantly engage our service users. So I'd be curious to know what that baseline is of people who think they're already doing it, what the principles are that they feel like mean that they are achieving it, and where those opportunities are for growth. But echoing Lynn's comment, love that you have a theory of change. It's great.
So it occurs to me that I feel like we could do a whole speaker series on how do you evaluate co-design work, right? How do you track those changes? What are meaningful changes? How to do that? It occurs to me that that might be a good, useful session, just talking about this notion of evaluation. And again, we've been exploring developmental evaluation, realist evaluation. How do you track those outcomes with social transformation? Vicki, I feel like someone just reminded me that you had your hand up. Do you want to make a comment as well? No, you're good. I noticed that you put stuff in the chat as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm Vicki Heen from Kingston. I'm involved with PSR Canada and also Accreditation Canada as a surveyor. And where I think there are some things that I see colliding here, a lot of people were talking about how do we implement recovery. And of course, co-design is an essential part of that whole system. So I see that sort of lining up, but I think this work you guys are doing is invaluable for when I go out and do surveys for Accreditation Canada. I can't tell you how often everything from, well, if leadership is willing to listen, ask how do we do it, but especially the services, the people doing direct service. They really want the tools to make sure they're doing it. And again, as you said, how do you really know if you're doing it? What are the things around the standards and so on and so forth? And anyway, I think this is invaluable. Thank you.
I feel like that's a perfect segue to where we're going next. So thanks, Vicki. Always good to hear your comments. Sam, do you want to put the chart back up? I don't want to miss anybody else if anyone else has a comment, but really good. So one of the things we want to do is engage you in a bit of a dialogue. We've talked at you for a fair bit. We know that there's lots of expertise in this room. Some of you are new. Some of you have been doing this work for a long time. Some of the things that we've been thinking about as a team in terms of strategic directions, what do people want? How can the hub meet the needs of the community? How can we advance these ideas? So as I go through these 3 topics, I want you to think about, is there one that particularly resonates with you that you'd like to have a bit of a dialogue now in that? So if you can, if you click on participants and you see your name there, you can click more and you can rename yourself. And so if you could put in brackets group 1, group 2, or group 3, that would be great, because we're going to set up breakout rooms in the back end. So click on participants, and then right beside your name, you should be able to rename your, so leave your name there if you can, but then just put in brackets group 1, group 2, or group 3. So the first dialogue, we're going to have a bit of a discussion around building community. So how might we build communities that foster design in health and social services? So how do we engage? How do we network? How do we create those safer, braver spaces? Who do we need to do that with? How do we engage those structurally vulnerable communities and do that well? The second group is about building capacity. So how might we build capacity to advance co-design? So, what kind of training, what knowledge do we need? What skills do we need? How do we create opportunities to do that work well? The third one is about changing systems and institutions. And Alexis talked about this a little bit. So again, this is kind of the decision makers. How do we change systems, institutions, infrastructure to be able to support really innovative quality co-design work? So those are sort of the 3 topic areas for dialogue. And so we're going to, if you don't care, also put don't care in the background, and we'll put you in it. We'll try to even out the groups as well if any of them are interest to you. You don't have to commit to one or the other. And so we're going to take about, is that right? We have 30 minutes, we're okay to do that. And then Emma's going to keep us on track as to when we need to come back. But we want you to, in the smaller groups, introduce yourself to each other. This is also about networking and conversations. And then think a little bit about, what are your experiences with this particular topic area? And then really some visioning. So what would we like to see? What do we want to build? How might we do this work better? So that's your challenge and your goal. And we have a Google Doc for you to fill out. So in your groups, if you could identify someone that could be a timekeeper, someone that could be a note taker, and then someone that can kind of report back on the work that you're doing as a group. How are you doing, Emma? Are you?
Yes, just adding people as I'm almost done. I'll open up the rooms in about half a minute.
If you can't figure out how to rename yourself, you can also put in the chat if you have a particular preference for a group. Otherwise, you can be part of the lucky random draw in one of the groups.
I'm going to open rooms now and then add the remaining people.
Perfect. Have you also put me in a room?
I think I did not, so that could be helpful, couldn't it?
I think that I am 3.
Room
Alexis
3.
and I are 3. Okay.
Yes. Not join 3.
And Alexis, I think, is with me. And then Jillian, I don't know if you want to be in 1 or 2.
Whatever works. Just put me wherever it's helpful.
I'll throw you in 1, Jillian, if you don't mind. That would be
Yep.
probably very helpful to have you there.
And Regina's group.
Yeah, I've got only 2 people, and maybe in the chat. I don't know. Chat. Group 2. Okay. Sorry. Breakout rooms. There we go. So assign to room 2. And sorry, Audrey, what group would you like to be in?
Can you pop me in anywhere? I just had to step away to help my,
Oh,
my
yeah.
little one with her JK, and I missed the instructions on what I was supposed to do.
So
I'd join in any.
There's 3 groups. There's one about building community and a little bit, and Here, let me get the
The
list
third
real.
one was building capacity, was it?
The second
Or-
one, building capacity. And the third one, let me just, because I have it right here, so let me just get it for you. There we go, breakout rooms. So the first one was building community, second building capacity, and 3 changing systems and institutions.
Oh, well, let's try number 3.
3, okay, and I think, oh, Zyra wants to go there too, so perfect.
Okay,
I will
thank you.
put you both there.
Thank you.
For those of you who are in our group, I see you continuing to write in the document, so that's really good. So again, if you haven't said your piece in your smaller group, continue to add to that Google Doc, and we will certainly share those with people as well. We'll organize and share. Thank you. Are we all back, Emma?
Yes,
okay.
we are.
I will turn it over to Michelle.
So I hope that was as enjoyable for everybody else as it was for me. And maybe I got very lucky with our group who is engaged in the discussion and willing to share. So thank you all for doing that. We did request prior to the breakouts that everybody volunteer a person to be a sharer back with this large group, and I was with group 1, and I know that is Trish for our group. I don't think I can see everybody on the screen at once, but what I'll ask each group to do, starting with Trish, is to share back about 3, we're flexible on the 3 key ideas or key topics of conversation that your group discussed and would like to bring back to this larger group. Trish, can I turn it to you?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I'm Trish. I was in group 1, and we were talking about how might we build community that fosters co-design in health and social services. So the first thing that we talked about was we defined community. And then we thought that the stakeholders that you need to involve at the very top of the list should be those with lived experiences of what you are trying to achieve and co-design and co-produce. The second thing we spoke about was respect and valuing everybody and having responsibility to the community, using the strengths and resources that a community has, and identifying the needs that they have in order to do the co-design and build community. And the third thing was trust and power dynamics within the process and within the community, and how important it is to build trust in order to do the co-design, co-production process, that without trust you can't really do it. So there was a suggestion that to include vulnerable communities in the discussion where you don't have a lot of time is to use a conduit, somebody that they trust to engage with the process for them. And I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trish. I want to make sure we get to all groups, so I'm going to ask you to hold thoughts or comments until we've heard from all 3 groups. Do we have a volunteer to present from group number 2? And if you don't mind just orienting us to your question, your topic.
No problem. So I'm Alison Dubé, and I'm our presenter for Group 2. Our question was, how do we build capacity to advance co-design? And our conversation, even though we had 2 questions, really flowed between the 2 of them a little more fluidly than sometimes you expect. So our question first question was what knowledge and resources are required to participate in co-design and from whom? And we noted that it's important that researchers have a willingness and awareness to participate in co-design activities and that they inform themselves of the principles before they start. And also that it's important that we have community organizations who are willing to engage with end users and help us act as translators, kind of explain what's going on, what timelines are like, help kind of act as that middle of the sandwich. And it's also important that we acknowledge the skills and capacity and time of our research participants, including family, community members, and all that, to recognize that their resources are finite as well, and that we shouldn't tax them too much, that we're getting paid. And it's important that we respect their time as well. So going on to that, a big thing we returned to when discussing skills that people need and how we can build them, a big skill we returned to was time management, respect for time, and making sure that our research team has a perspective that's focused on not just our needs as researchers, but the needs of the people we're working with, ideally including financial compensation for their time. And a genuine desire to see change. We recognize that sometimes co-design activities can seem a little never-ending to end users, so making sure that we tell them what our goals are at the end and keeping them up to date as we move along so that they can see the change happening, not feel like it's a start and then no end ever. Yeah. And an explanation that change happens slowly, so they're aware that this is a not an automatic process. And another one was methods for reflection was very important, making sure that we're able to share that feedback back on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Allison. Some lovely tangible things that people can carry out of that session. I appreciate that. Do we have a volunteer from group 3 who can orient us to your question and provide a summary?
That will be me. So we had a very passionate group who really sees the need, expressed a lot of affirmation for the need for system and institutional change to support co-design work, and a lot of experiences bashing their heads up against walls, trying to make that change or starting to make change and then having it be reverted due to a policy shift or so on. So thinking about how, if we, the need to engage actors in various systems of power. So that was our conversation. In terms of the top 3, I welcome anybody to clarify for me, but I do just want to reflect on what group 2 was talking about in terms of time, and time being this thing that can actually be exclusive to folks as sort of this avoiding academic language, but this capitalistic sort of colonial notion of time and how it tries to squeeze people into these boxes of time that just doesn't really account for the process of co-design in terms of it being authentic and meaningful. So overall, we heard an affirmation for the need for system change, an affirmation for the potential of co-design to disrupt systems of power. And then we talked a little bit about vulnerability and relinquishing power as well. So I guess maybe 3 major themes. One of them was around the need for culture change. And somebody said that culture eats strategy for lunch and that we need fundamental culture change. So this means inclusion of various stakeholders and people with all various levels of power and privilege early in the process, such as in grant applications and ethics, and throughout knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization phases of the work, as well as facilitating relationships and emotional literacy among all stakeholders. So thinking about folks who are in positions of power as well in that regard. So again, just talking about the need to engage folks who are major stakeholders in the beginning phases in terms of ethics, applications, granting systems, and being more inclusive. So did I miss anything? Does anybody want to add on?
Talked a little bit about emergent design, right? So, often funding applications and ethics are about, you have to have everything spelled out. Whereas really, if you're doing proper co-design work, you're going to do that with your community as you go. And so how do you use grantsmanship to talk about this notion of emergent design as something that's a valid approach, and to sell that, I guess, to people that will fund the process.
Wonderful, thank you. So I want to be very mindful, speaking of time, of everybody's time in this group, and really so appreciative of the ideas that were shared across all three groups. I think we have time for one, maybe two comments. If there was anything that you heard that you'd like to expand on or to connect the ideas between groups. I have some thoughts, but I'd rather hear yours. Oh, I see in the chat that there was another talk about having funding organizations evaluate their own process and their ability to enable co-design. Vivian, did you want to add anything to that?
Not really, just that a lot of the funding, and this is coming from a funding organization with United Way, but we've engaged in a couple processes, for example, with my tax in the past year, that are very academic, and even though they're supposed to be community engaged, if you want to do co-design with people with lived and living experience throughout the whole process, some people are trying to do that, but there are various structures in place that may prevent you from actually doing that. That is just, it's not accessible.
Thank you for that. I think that's come up in lots of different conversations when the Co-Design Hub has engaged in our community, that there's some of these structural barriers at play. And one of the things, if I can be honest, we're wrestling with is what is our place in terms of advocacy? Can we have should we have a role in trying to dismantle some of these structural barriers that make it difficult for people, us, as well as our communities to do co-design? I saw another comment in the chat from Trish that all three groups spoke about power and sharing of power. Absolutely.
Michelle, I was just echoing your thing about, yeah, where do we focus our efforts? There's many, many things that need to be done. Is there a wish list? Where should we prioritize this work?
Regina, would you mind expanding on what you placed in the chat?
Well, just thinking about some of the work in low and middle income countries and around community-based research, thinking about the inclusion, the need for reflection, the need to really consider how does this work, how are we engaging others, how are we thinking about privileging leaders within those contexts so that it's really becomes a process by which we pull away, and that people with living experience, for example, are then leading those initiatives in ways that make sense to them.
What I find fascinating about being involved in this project over the past 2 years is the diversity in examples that our communities, people who have joined, have to share. And I hope that came out in your group as well. I know it did in group 1, but also in this broader discussion. So one of the goals of the hub is to not have it end here. We always really get into the discussion towards the ends of our events, and all of our feedback say we wish there was more time. And so we built in as much discussion time today as we could, but we're also hoping that people will continue. Sam, would you like to share the slide that's got our wrap up and ways for people to stay engaged with our community if they would like to? I know people are having to hop off. So if you would like to continue this dialogue with us and be part of this, what we see as a community of practice, then we would invite you to check back to our website. It's right there. It's got our news, our events. We're constantly building the resources here that are there for you to see. It's also where the information about the Innovation Hub is. And thank you, Sam, for dropping the mailing list link into the chat. I just saw that come up. The mailing list will give you updates to your inbox about when new speaker series are coming out, when there's new grant opportunities or other events that you might like to be a part of. If Twitter is more your jam, we're trying to be cross-posting things, and so you can get the information via Twitter or via the mailing list. And of course, we're always open to individual emails as well. Samantha, who started off our presentation today, is excellent at reviewing, responding, and sharing with the team as needed. So with that, let me just say thank you to absolutely everybody who joined and shared your ideas. We will be taking them forward to help continue to refine our theory of change and to prioritize our work over the next year. But if there's a way that you think that we could support co-design in the community, then please, that's what we're here to do. And we look forward to any further feedback or interaction and discussion with you. Did I miss anything in the chat? I see that it's very lively. Oh, there's a lot of things. Thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you all.
Take care, everybody.